Welcome to Level with Emily Reese. This is a conversation I can say with a lot of certainty that I never would have expected, at least in this corner of my life with regards to video games. I never expected there to be a popular game that had a soundtrack written and recorded by a professional early music ensemble. I just didn't think that day would come. I don't know. Not that I pined for it, but now that it's here, I'm glad it's here because I got to speak with two of the founders of Alkemie Early Music Ensemble, and they made the music for Pentiment, which is a 2D narrative adventure RPG murder mystery set in like the 1520s or the early 16th century, somewhere around there. Crazy. And it was like the brainchild, this like lifelong ambition of director and designer Josh Sawyer, who comes from Obsidian. So Pentiment was published by Obsidian, all these things. But anyway, I spoke with two of the founders of Alkemie Early Music Ensemble, Sean Ricketts and Tracy Cowart, and I just loved talking with them. It's a fascinating time in music. You'll hear them say many different times how much we don't know about music from that era because it just wasn't written down. So it's really cool to hear them talk about it. And the instruments are, of course, non-traditional these days, right? I mean, they're just, nobody walks around with a shawm in their back pocket anymore in the North America. I don't know. So it's just neat to hear them talk about that era of music and their lifelong devotion to it as professional stewards of it, right? I mean, it's really amazing what they did. And the music is fantastic. I loved the score to this game. Thing is, you don't hear it in our YouTube conversations. So if you want to hear the music, you got to listen to the audio podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts. All right, join us on Discord. Link is down in the show notes. If you can support us financially on Patreon, that would be amazing. Patreon.com/level. We're adding perks, which is a good thing. So that might give you more incentive to join the Level family. We would love it. Yeah. All right. Well, here are Sean Ricketts and Tracy Cowart of Alkemie Early Music Ensemble talking about their absolutely fantastic music for the game Pentiment.
I'm Sean Ricketts. It's so weird that I'm not introducing Tracy immediately because this is Tracy Cowart. And yeah, we both live in Brooklyn. We both have doctorates in historical performance practice from Case Western Reserve University. And we are lucky to have a career where we get to do almost everything together. We're best friends. We love making music together, administrating together, writing grants, listening to edits, teaching students. You name it, we'll try to find a way to do it as a duo. So we're co-managing directors of the Alkemie Medieval Ensemble. And we, in that capacity, got asked to make music for Pentiment.
Wow. How did that happen? Who did you know? Or you know what I mean? Like, how did this happen?
It all goes back to Minnesota.
Oh, no kidding.
True,
Yay!
actually.
Yay, Minnesota.
So we have, so I'm Tracy Cowart, as Sean said, and yeah, we co-manage things together, which is, I think more and more people are understanding it's easy to create hierarchies because at some point it's like, well, who's doing the thing? But also it is nice to kind of lead into partnerships too, which is something that we do as an ensemble. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but it's nice when you have a partner who you trust and you know that you both kind of have your strengths, but one person can, say someone has COVID, somebody else can kind of rise to the occasion, and then we're kind of like waves, and
yeah.
It's always interesting. We keep getting kind of asked to differentiate more and more, and I think our world wants to put us into boxes. So the reasons I love this game so much and the music we made for it, because it kind of doesn't fit neatly into a lot of boxes, which is fun. But back to your question, we have a beloved colleague who is also on our board, and she kept asking me. She said, "You play the hurdy-gurdy, right?" And I said, "Well, the hurdy-gurdy kind of plays me. You know, it's a finicky little monster." But she said, "I have this friend who I've done some work with, and I think there might be an interesting opportunity for the hurdy-gurdy." And this friend turned out to be Josh Sawyer, who's the director of Pentiment and also of a lot of other games which people love. And he finally got in touch with, I think, with Sean. Is that right?
Yeah, he contacted us through our website, and those communications go to me.
Okay.
And he said, I'm a friend of Keri's. They went to Lawrence University together. It's an Upper Midwest connection.
Yep.
And so Keri, I think Tracy didn't explicitly say that Keri went to Lawrence. I think she grew up in Kentucky, but had been living for many years in Minnesota. And she's an amazing musician, Keri Honea. She's in new music. Yeah, she's wonderful.
She's awesome. Yeah.
And so we met her in Cleveland, and then it was exciting because whenever I would go home to see my family in Minneapolis, I would meet Keri for drinks.
Yeah.
Which was I love seeing my family, but it's also nice to have friends to see when you're when you're home. So she had told Josh to contact us, and then immediately followed back up to say, you might have gotten kind of a weird email, but I can confirm this person is legit. Like, you need to call him back right away.
Oh, wow.
So I did, and it was so wonderful because Tracy and I, we're musicians and we're going to a lot of musical things, but we are also consuming other types of media all the time.
Sure.
And seeing there are so many TV shows and movies and other properties that are kind of set in earlier periods, and as specialists in those periods, we really appreciate seeing, the art and the costuming, and sometimes are really sad to see that in a show where you'll read descriptions of them hand beating every bead on their beautiful dress, and then you hear music that is totally not appropriate to the country and century.
Right. Just wildly anachronistic in a way that, I'm down for that as an artistic choice. But sometimes you think, was this a choice, or was it just kind of an accident that happened and nobody really noticed,
Right. You're like, are they not aware that there are people who do this and have those instruments? Right. Of course, as just your friendly freelance Brooklyn medieval ensemble, we don't know those people. So, So when Josh contacted me, he told me that essentially, and I'm not a video game person, my partner is, so he, when I told him about it, he ended up finding out about it because he is also on our board, and so we signed an NDA, and so we couldn't talk about it for a long time. But the people affiliated with our ensemble knew what we were working on, and he was so excited. But Josh told me that it had been his dream. He was a history major. I think he actually started as a voice major and then became a history major at Lawrence University.
Oh, wow.
And that it had been his dream ever since he started working in the video game industry, which is what he'd done since graduating, to make a historically informed video game.
Wow.
And so it was really a passion project for him. And of course, I told him that was also our deepest dream. So it was really, really fun.
Wow.
And pretty overwhelming because we are a nonprofit arts ensemble. We did not have any commercial recording experience as a group before we did this. One of our members had made actually music for another game, I think Civilization 6.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good one.
And they had experience with that, and actually in the pandemic has been doing more and more video game composing and recording. But the rest of us had never done commercial recording work, and we had not yet made a recording of any kind.
Yeah. I noticed that because I tried to find more, you know what I mean? And there's some recordings on YouTube, which is fun. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be more.
Yeah, in the last year, we have 2 recordings that were we've we've gotten in the studio. We're in various stages of editing. One of them is closer than the other. So in the next year, we should release 2 more things.
Oh, cool.
We also, during the pandemic, recorded a whole bunch of concert videos and are planning to start releasing videos from that. So there will be, we have kind of this like, the past 3 years, it's like we've been laying this large egg.
Yes.
And now Sean and I watched Gremlins recently, and I feel like Pentiment is one of the Gremlins that's emerged. There's some others that are kind of gestating, but the game was also kind of, like Sean said, we started with very little recording experience, and other than just being captured. And the demo track we sent over to kind of be like, hey, is this a good fit? Is this what you're looking for? Yeah. We recorded all together in a room before a concert we were about to do. And that was how we made that. And that's how we typically had recorded in the past. Then we sent that over, and then, March 2020 happened, and we were like, well, this is kind of all we've got going on right now. We really want to do it. So we, we went through the whole path of figuring out how to do multi-tracking separately. And by the end of it, we were working with an engineer, and the dream we discovered was to multi-track things, but to have us all in the studio together, because a lot of it is, of course, scored and played to a click track. But a lot of it is also improvised in the moment, and then improvisations layered on top of each other. And if we're all there together, then we could immediately fix things or add things. We started
and have ideas in the moment instead of it. It was just this logistical challenge because it was coordinating with people's schedules, because everybody was also recording themselves, and because we all live in different places. And so it would be this hard thing where if we got through everybody's, but then decided somebody needed to re-record, then was like, well, when is that person available? Like, we're trying to get this done. And it's just more fun. Our compositional process and our arrangement process is very collaborative. That's how we always work. We try to make some decisions ahead of time, but we're really inspired by each other's ideas in the moment. And so being able to be in the same place, obviously, is ideal.
And the eye contact, right? Being able to look at each other while you're making music is huge. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And just, to hear what someone's doing and respond to it.
Yeah.
The other thing that, when we've been talking to Josh about this, he mentioned that this was a very different process than he usually goes through for scoring games. So we were working in conjunction with the team. He said, normally the whole game will be worked out, and then you'll give it to a composer and they'll start composing everything basically in scored MIDI files, and you'll work back and forth with those. And then eventually, like in the end, they either finalize everything with the MIDI, or, if it's a big budget thing, you hire an orchestra who just plays everything, the end. But with us, we were getting narrative prompts. Josh would say, this is the mood I'm looking for. This is what's happening. So we kind of had a sense of the general arc of the game, or like moments within it. And then you'd say, can you give me something? And at first we were creating like final finished tracks. And then this was part of our learning process, then he would put it with the gameplay and say, well, that's not quite getting what what I want. We'd say, oh, okay. So then we started sending, like David would play a melody on the VL, or I'd send a track that was, voices singing what we thought might be happening, but we knew we were going to do with instruments. So we kind of working out drafts that way. But it was a very collaborative back and forth process where we were doing a lot kind of in real time as the game developed. So the other interesting thing about this is, when we started, we had kind of one set of instruments. And Sean, you made a list, right? Like, how many more instruments did we have at the end?
I did make a list. Because as medieval musicians, part of the joy for us is that there's no instrumentation indicated, basically until, even when you're looking at the 16th century, there's kind of still, and there was an assumption that like you could play this music on different combinations of instruments, different families of instruments, voices. So you're really only limited by how many instruments do you want to buy? And how many instruments do you want to practice?
Yeah.
And we're pretty Tracy's partner is an amazing multi-instrumentalist, and he calls it instrument acquisition syndrome, IAS. And we've got a really bad case of IAS. Mm-hmm. So throughout this, we bought many new instruments when we made the first demo track. And we actually added one more core member to the ensemble during the pandemic. Cool. So we added one new member. We also broadened our kind of reach to include other people that we thought would be helpful. But that one new member, one of the first things he did at the beginning of COVID was that he learned how to play the medieval bagpipes. So cool. So then we had bagpipes for a possibility. And I bought a 6-string lyre. So then that was a possibility. I borrowed a sham from this amazing early music ensemble from Pifero, who I've played with a few times. So we had friends like ferrying this sham back and forth between Philadelphia and New York so that I could record. Because in Act 2, when things start getting more martial, I was like, we need to have sham for this.
Yes.
And the same...
And sham being a double reed, right?
Yes,
double
like
reed,
the loud outdoor double reed instrument.
Yeah, big reeds, right?
Pretty big.
Yeah, compared to like an oboe.
Much bigger than an oboe. Yeah. Kind of a bassoon. It's more of a style of reed that looks more similar to a bassoon reed than to an oboe reed.
Yeah.
So we just kept adding more different things as we purchased those instruments. For me, I had just ordered, before the pandemic, an F bass recorder that I actually envisioned using for consort playing with other people. Mm-hmm. And I thought that I would never play it because my hands are pretty small and it's a pretty big instrument. But actually, the first week that I had it, I used it to record my line in memory in City of Reason. So the very first part of the game is like, that's it. It's the first time I'd ever played that instrument, and it's on the recording. Wow.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting for us as we got to continue to explore new ideas. And in the third act, when those scenes in the Mithraeum that are kind of evoking early Greek music, one of our members, Nicolo, was hired the previous year to score a theatrical production of the Iliad. And they had researched that kind of music and was totally ready to write us some ancient Greek music.
That track, the Mithraeum, is crazy. That track is absolutely crazy because there's like what's the plucked instrument in there with the weird tuning? Talk about that.
So the plucked instrument, it's a kantele. It's kind of a plucked. Is it, Tracy? We didn't see it. It's like a hammered dulcimer style.
It's like a hammered dulcimer style thing.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not plucked. It's hammered.
And there was, but was Nicolo plucking it? Do we know?
I don't know if they were, because this was one thing that we did not, we multi-tracked it not in the same place.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
But then the lyre is in there
but
too,
then the 6-string lyre is plucked, and
that
those things can be tuned in any way.
Sure.
And then the wind instruments, I was playing Ducenne and recorder, and Ducenne is actually the pitches. That's kind of the soft early double reed. It's like the soft sister of the sham.
Okay.
Ducenne means sweet, and so that was kind of the indoor double reed instrument of the medieval and Renaissance. And there's so much pitch flexibility that I was able to actually match the pitch of the kantele. So we did that track first, and then they're playing. The kantele has a lot of microtonality tuned in the instrument.
Yeah.
And then I just was able to listen to match it. And I actually could use the same fingerings to play many of those notes because there's so many notes possible within the Ducenne. And then that track, this was in Act 3. By the time we got to Act 3, we were really having a good time. But if you also hear there's like a watery sound that was us recording us trying to pour water slowly, and then we slowed it down in post-production.
Nice.
To try to get, because we were thinking about the sounds of ruins and things you might hear. And and there are various chimes that we integrated.
Yes.
We had a really fun time making that track.
I think what also makes that track sound so different, I was just seeing if I could find it, but what their research was mostly in when they were thinking about Greek music was Greek music theory, because we don't have ancient Greek music, right?
Right.
And so they were looking into the theoretical constructs and the way that the tuning system might have worked. And so for that, the tuning system they came up with involved stacking fifths, but then also coming up with these neutral thirds in certain places. And the neutral third, it's not a major third, it's not a minor third. And the combination with the fifths, it gives it this sense where you just feel like you're in a different world.
Yeah.
And that was, and like Sean said, she had the flexibility to enter that world on her double reed instrument.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. There's some really nice duets through the album too. There's like a couple of stringed instruments play a duet in like Andreas's Return, which and I just let's talk about that one before I go on to the next duet. But that one I like because it's a really nice example of the kind of improvisation and ornamentation I think that you were alluding to before. So can you talk a little bit about that track and who's playing and what they're playing?
Mm-hmm. Sean, I'll start. Why don't you jump in?
I feel like I'm not a string player, and neither is Tracy, so we were not involved, but I was there operating the recording technology when that was we're so lucky to work with these two VL players, Nicholas Seligman and David McCormick, and they play the VL as an early fiddle. There's a ton of flexibility in terms of how many strings it might have. You can play it up on the shoulder like a violin, or between the legs, more like a cello, a very small cello. You can tune your strings to anything you want. And we have historical records that VL players, there were different tunings that we have recorded that people used. And we know that they made those choices based on, it was, what drones they wanted so they could self-accompany, and also what key their people were playing in. But our VL players have a really beautifully flexible style that's influenced by David, I think, had an early training as kind of a jazz violinist, and Nicolo is a really accomplished bluegrass and old time player, and they bring those traditions to this, and also just have created as a duo such a great rapport, even so much that in Andreas's Farewell and Return, which was not recorded at the same time, Nicolo did the top line. No, Nicolo did the bottom line first, and then David just listened to it once, and then
and he was like, "I got this,"
and then sat there and he was like, "Oh yeah, I got this." And then I pressed play, and I think he might have done it in one take, his top part. And it was just because they've worked together for so many years. We started playing together in 2013, that they're kind of perfectly attuned to each other and what they might do. Because that line, it's kind of an improvisatory version of polyphony that's written out, but it's totally out of time. Of course, like, it wasn't performed to a click. And there are a lot of liberties taken if you're looking at the printed music. And so David, I think, was really playing by ear with Nicolo and kind of perfectly created this mournful duet. Yes, David and Nicolo, we couldn't do anything without them.
At this point, we can't have a concert that doesn't have them featured in the VL duet moment. We're just like, the people demand a VL duet.
We joke, and it's something really special that we've talked about the collaborative nature of our ensemble. We don't have a musical leader. We kind of take turns programming and working together. But in the room, not one person is in charge. Sometimes we'll assign people to, if you're a singer and you're singing a solo, you'll kind of lead the rehearsal for that piece because the assumption is you've probably thought about it more than anybody else. But another big part of our ethos that I think also came through on the album is that we really want to feature everybody. Like everybody has different strengths. And so in any concert and in the album, we want the VLs to be featured as soloists and as a duet. We want to have some music where where singers can sing alone without instruments, because that's such a special sound. And we want to feature all of the singers as soloists, because we think that everybody has something so special to offer. We don't have a like front man or front person and like backup vibe. We could, or rather we do, but it changes from piece to piece.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Well, and the other duet that really stood out to me was this one where maybe it's both of you singing. I don't know. Sister Amelie's Second Vision.
Oh, so that is actually Elena, our third singer.
Okay. Funny.
We ended up in the beginning, we assigned her to sing Sister Amelie's First Vision, which is based on the Hildegard von Bingen chant, Quia ergo femina.
Which is one of the, Josh requested 2 specific pieces in this entire thing. Everything else he left up to us. And that chant, the Quia ergo, and Ben, the Brother Rudiger's chant towards the end, the Petrus lead. They were the 2 ones he was like, I really want those on there. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we had assigned that to Elena, and that was one of our favorite parts of working on Act 1 was what we came up with for that piece. And I have to say, I was actually not making any of the sounds in that, but I was like, but it's my favorite track that we made. Good job, everybody.
Are you talking about the one where it's just one voice, or
no,
where
I think
2 voices together?
The 2 voices together are Elena multi-tracked with herself.
Oh, okay. Oh, funny. I mean, it does sound like, I guess it does sound like one person in hindsight. Yeah.
Yeah. and in a way that, because we had so decided that she was the voice of that vision, we wanted to keep that.
Sure.
And that piece was, I think, really demonstrative of our kind of collaborative effort, because we knew we wanted it to be based on the same music as the chant, but we wanted it to sound different. And so we decided we wanted to rhythmicize it, which is something that we're often thinking about as an option for music, because the music of Hildegard von Bingen is unrhythmicized neumes.
Sure.
And we work with the music of Hildegard all the time. We really love it. And we often think about rhythmicizing it based on like kind of one of the early rhythmic strategies, the medieval rhythmic modes, which are essentially combinations of long and short notes.
Okay.
So we wanted to apply that rhythm, and then we have a hot debate over whether or not we like, as an ensemble, the practice of just shadowing, harmonizing in fourths and fifths, what we call Vorbedon.
Okay.
I usually historically have taken an anti-Foberdone stance, although as I've taught more and more classes in kind of early compositional processes, and so as I've worked on it with my students more and more, I am kind of getting used to it. But Ben, so I really wanted to be rhythmicized, and I worked on that, and then Ben really wanted to try writing in a Foberdone, so he did that, and I kind of edited it, and then I knew that I wanted to have kind of a Ducenne accompanimental line, which often I'll just improvise a line. But then Nicolo saw this and thought, no, I really want to write out a line. I really have a good idea for an accompanimental line. So they wrote that line. And so we all kind of worked on it. And then there was improvised sound effects that we layered on top of that.
Sure. Oh, very cool.
So it was
go ahead.
Team effort. No, sorry.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, the fourths, hearing the parallel fourths, I mean, that's such it yanks you pre-1600 or so, right? I mean, it's just like, and then that was such a huge no-no for so many hundreds of years, like 400 years or something. It was like, don't do that. And it's just one of those things to me that makes it sound old, right? When we think about things that make music sound old.
Right. What makes it sound a certain way. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's something that we thought about a lot because as people, I sometimes still just describe myself as a medieval lady. And I do music, which I didn't necessarily anticipate happening to me as a career, but I'm really happy about it. I do also play Baroque instruments, and I also sing, music of the 19th and 20th centuries, and we do a lot of new music too. But in terms of like, we're so often in the sound world of the medieval period that to us, certain things sound very normal. And it was interesting in our back and forth with Josh to have conversations to realize that certain things that we always assumed or had taken for granted didn't necessarily read the same way to Josh and the team at Obsidian. And so navigating that was kind of fascinating.
Sure.
Yeah. And I feel like now we thought about it more and we're like, we could name like 3 things, Tracy. It was that adding the triangle makes things sound festive. We often, Nicolo has kind of a very hype triangle technique that they've created and that we often use for us to just create energy, but like a neutral energy. And we tried to have triangle indicate heightened energy in a dangerous way, and that did not work. So the triangle is not a good instrument for danger. Neither is the soprano recorder, unfortunately, because that's also another thing that my assumption is like, oh yeah, if you want it to sound kind of level 10, you got to add the high recorder. Apparently, no, that's not true. So we learned that like we needed to go towards essentially low sounds read as ominous and dangerous. High sounds or very, very, very high, but not the recorder. Unfortunately, the recorder does not have a dangerous setting. Which is really sad.
Not unless
for me.
it's played by a second grader, then we
and then also that we really wanted, because the 16th century was really the age of polyphony, and so we wanted to work with as much polyphony as we could, and we didn't kind of clear that broad concept with Josh. And around about Act 2, because he'd made it really clear he was interested in using these early instruments and historical practices and working as much as possible with historical music. But basically we had a conversation where he was like, it doesn't have to be polyphony, and you can go earlier than the 16th century. But you can go to other countries.
Right.
Yeah.
But not later. He said, the acts are happening at like 15 blah, 1543 and something else. And he was like, so we can go earlier with the assumption that music continued to circulate.
Yeah.
But let's not
no leading tones.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, we did compose some music as well. And so that music is, of course, quote unquote, later. But right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But we when we would compose polyphony or when we would do things we'd take monophony and reimagine it or rewrite it. We were kind of still in the language, the modal and harmonic language of the medieval and Renaissance period.
Yep.
Or we would kind of really fracture it. We don't use effects that often on the recording, but they're kind of sprinkled throughout. And at some points when it was like, we need to have something that is kind of beyond the constructs of reality. In like the City of Madness or something. That's when we would do things like, pitch the bagpipes down by an octave, or I can't remember exactly what we did on that, Sean, but
in City of Madness we put the low drone through an effects pedal actually, which kind of gave it, and the very high droning viol also we put a little bit of an effect through that as well. Which was really fun to get to do. But it's still using those early instruments as the basis for what we did with those materials.
Yep. So what instrument did both of you start off on? Tracy, how did you get your musical start?
Well, my musical start, the instrument I wanted to play when I was really young was the harp. I saw Mickey's Jack and the Beanstalk, and there was that harp playing itself. And I was like, I want to play it so bad. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And living in the middle of nowhere, hours and hours from anything in Colorado, my parents said, we support you wanting to learn how to play music, but a harp is simply not practical. So
for so many reasons.
So many reasons. So they got me a small upright piano, and that is the main instrument I learned on. So I think as a music this way. And then I've sung, which is interesting. When we talk to Nicolo, they really understand music on a grid.
Sure.
And it's just a really kind of a different mindset. But so I started on the piano, and I loved singing. So, I always sang. And then I went and I got a business degree because people thought that would be a good idea. And I graduated and was like, but this is really not what I want to be doing. I want to be making music. And so I went back and got many other degrees in music. But eventually we founded this medieval ensemble, and part of the joy of it is that we do get to explore and play other instruments together. So it was maybe 3 or 4 years into our being, and I said, hey guys, I've always wanted to play the harp. Will you put up with me? There's nothing like learning how to play an instrument with a band of really awesome colleagues who have direct experience in what you're trying to do from different angles and are willing to you sound great, like the harp. As I was learning to play it, Sean would sometimes rail against the machine because her instruments are all really kind of loud and they have a strong personality. So it's like, if you mess up on the soprano sham or the recorder, everybody knows about it. With the harp, you can play almost anything, and it's like it may not be in the chord, but it doesn't really hurt you, So
it doesn't sound bad.
I mean, as the harp player, sometimes I'm like, oh, that one really didn't work. But but I started learning how to play medieval harps, and that's been a really fun process to bring into our mix and to do as an adult.
How about you, Sean?
So as I mentioned when we were just chatting earlier, I grew up going to orchestra concerts. My grandfather played in the Minnesota Orchestra for decades. And so I also started on piano. And then I started when I was 10. My band teacher tried to convince me to play the French horn, but my deepest dream was to play the oboe. And so I did.
Nice.
And I was lucky to get started on that. And then I also grew up singing and took voice lessons starting in high school. And then kind of auditioned for various degrees where I could have gotten, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm bringing this up. It's just such a Minnesotan thing to say that, like, I could have gone to St. Olaf and been a triple major in piano, oboe, and voice. But I did not do that. I went to school in a place that I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to parse out your thought process from when you're younger, but where I could only get an oboe degree. And I continued to take voice lessons because I love to sing. And my voice teacher at that point, actually, who did a lot of early music, told me that he really thought I should learn to play the Baroque oboe and that I should have a career as a freelance early musician. And I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about at all. I have no interest in that. So to make a long story short, he was totally right. That is exactly what I did. And then at this point, when you're an early wind player, because players at the time I started playing Baroque oboe first, and we know that those players also doubled on recorder. Like, you'll have recorder parts and oboe parts in the same score. And the oboes and the recorders don't play together, so it's really normal to learn the recorder. So I started doing that. I started playing the sham, and then once you've played enough of those instruments, then it starts to kind of take off, and then you just have many, many, many sticks in your bedroom. Everywhere covered. But I started doing medieval music with Tracy when we were working on our doctorates together, and I was just so inspired because, to me, actually, even though I grew up going to classical concerts,
Yeah.
The music that I listen to for fun I've listened to pop music a lot of the time, and kind of love the way I listen to music is like, I want to have like a visceral feeling when I listen to it. Like that's what I'm excited about. And actually I'm getting better at musical analysis, like analytical listening, as I've taught more and had to think about it.
Yeah.
But especially at first, I was like, I don't know what they're doing. I don't care. I just want to have this feeling. And when I heard my first medieval music that I heard in real life, it was the first time that in a classical context, I'd had that kind of feeling of, oh my gosh, I don't understand how people are even doing this. But those are the most exciting sounds I've ever heard. Like while and of course, like I love classical music too, and this was my 3rd degree, so it's not like I hated it.
Right. Yeah. No, it just opened.
It really changed my life. And at that point, I actually didn't play the recorder at all, and I didn't know my way in as an instrumentalist. I was like, I just want to be around it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, bass recorder or any of the recorder in general is a really beautiful sound if it's played by someone who knows what they're doing, right? I mean, but especially those low recorders and as you mentioned, it happens right away in the beginning of the soundtrack, but it happens throughout, and I just loved hearing that. Loved it.
Thank you. I loved getting to play those. It's also, my instruments are beautifully made by Tom Prescott. He's this maker up in New Hampshire who has been making beautiful instruments for decades and is now retiring, to our dismay, across America and beyond. But his instruments are really designed to play together, because in the 16th century, you would have a whole consort of recorders, like SATTB recorders. And so actually in this multi-tracked process, it was really nice to hear how beautiful they sounded with each other. Because usually in our mixed consort, sometimes Ben, our bagpipe and dulcian player, also will play recorders, but most often it's just me.
Okay.
So that was really fun to get to experience.
Absolutely. And Tracy, you mentioned the hurdy-gurdy. So tell us about the weird-ass hurdy-gurdy.
Well, I'm struggling to remember. The hurdy-gurdy is, I think, on one track.
Maybe or maybe not.
Maybe
not. Oh, it's not on anything.
Because it's really not on anything. The thing
I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
It's a very finicky instrument, and it's really good for self-accompanying with a drone, right?
Sure.
And playing a counter melody if you're a singer. But if you have VLs who can accompany you with essentially an unbroken sound, the hurdy-gurdy kind of allows you to be a singer and a VL player simultaneously. And because we have VL players who are frankly better than I am at that job than I am on the hurdy-gurdy, I don't think we used it. I think that's true. We used it on the next recording that we have coming out, but it's funny that kind of, it's kind of a quintessential medieval instrument, and it's got that drone sound, that nasal drone sound, and so people project that understanding onto the tracks they hear, when really it's the VLs, which it's the same thing, right? Like the hurdy-gurdy is a wheel that is that has rosin on it that is causing a string to vibrate, very similar to the process of having a bow that has rosin on it that's causing a string to vibrate. So and they're gut strings, so it's that similar sound, and we just ended up we had other things that were giving us what we needed, so I think we just didn't bring it in. Sean?
And Tracy, I feel like we should bring up, we did have a drone-based instrument that we used a lot, the Scheitholt.
Right.
And that kind of gave us that low drone sound that you can hear it. It's the kind of instrument that starts on the body, both bodies. And that was actually...
Those tracks are amazing.
And the body was the first piece that we made as just kind of a prototype.
Oh, wow.
In the very beginning. And that was actually right after Mikayla had gotten the Scheitholt. I think that was like its first time being recorded. Was when we made that initial demo track. And that's something that, because Josh was really interested in having a drone.
Right.
And so we use the Scheitholt a lot. And But yeah, I want to bring up, if anybody wants to hear the hurdy-gurdy, it has been on a recording played by Tracy's partner.
Oh, cool.
In the group Hesperus that makes a lot of soundtracks for silent movies, and they made a soundtrack to this silent movie. I think it was from the 1920s that was a history of witchcraft called Hexan. And it's shocking. Truly like nothing I've ever seen or could have imagined.
Wow.
And the hurdy-gurdy really does a good job of accompanying the sounds of witchcraft.
I believe it. Wow. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up The Body, because those tracks, again, these are, I can't remember if it's all strings or mostly strings, but it's very raw playing, right? It's very like pulling the bow across the strings, and it gives you this like, sense of foreboding, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and actually all the string sounds you hear, that's just one Scheitholt.
Oh, wow.
So there's no VLs. Actually, I don't think David is involved in those tracks. We had an early version where we imagined The Body, and then there were like spooky VL mystery sounds overlaid on top of it. Was an option that we gave that was, now I'm like, oh, we should listen back to that. I bet that sounded pretty weird. But yeah, so it's just the Scheitholt. It can create
very cool,
such a thick droning sound, and then there are various other drones layered on top of it. We recorded ourselves doing some vocal drones, and then there's also the low dulcian, the low early bassoon is making some of that.
Oh,
and the Scheitholt, it's like a triangular instrument. Nicole likes to put it on a wooden ironing board that I believe he found in his partner's house that belonged to his grandmother or something. But anyway, it creates a nice resonator for it. So you hear the difference tone below the drone notes, which also kind of creates that deep richness. But it's a flat bridge, and so it's a bow along a flat bridge, and then you play it by sliding up and down a melody string, and so that also kind of creates the kind of portamento wah 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 sounds.
Yeah.
Very
cool. Loved it. Oh, such a cool set of tracks. The second body, or second body, the second body.
Body of the second body,
yeah. The second body of the second body's second. Yeah, and also like the kind of combat-y tracks, we call it combat music in games, and they're like these frenetic dances with, changing meters, and that those tracks were really cool, like the Mob Pursues, the Abbot, and Flight from the Library. I loved. So talk a little bit about those, that style, the dancing, and the just mixed meter situation that's happening.
This was a fun, so this was also kind of a fun learning situation for us, insofar as those scenes directly played on top of what Sean was talking about before, that the triangle and the recorder featured in early versions of, if not both, at least one of those tracks. And that was where things weren't working. And also polyphony. Also, we had a kind of a hard time creating that sense of danger. And we found that monophony, or things that started off as monophony, and then we added a bass line to, essentially worked better, because they had that, they have essentially mixed meter often built into them, because that was just the way music was working at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so with that mixed meter built in, and kind of the one melody line to follow, it created a sense of fast pacing that seemed to read as like you said, as danger, as frenetic, as opposed to when we had full-blown polyphony with hype triangle and possibly soprano recorder. The feedback we got was that it came across as almost comical, kind of like if you think of like silent movies where people are, like running really quickly and and what was one of the things that was fun, we heard this and we just heard the tracks by themselves and we thought they sound super exciting. It's a chase scene, but as part of this conference that Sean and I recently did, one of the things that I did was to take the gameplay and then take the the final track off of it and then underscore it with various drafts that we did. So you could see, so we could see what Josh and the team had seen. And it was totally true that it was just fascinating to see that the kind of fast polyphonic tracks with more regular phrasing didn't work as well as monophonic tracks with this irregular feeling kind of built into it.
Sure.
Sean, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, part of it that it's interesting and makes sense is that, so we kind of, and this is actually when we were talking about these, is when we had the conversation with Josh, where he released us from things having to originate in the 16th century.
Right.
Because that's one of the features of kind of earlier music, is that they didn't write, we didn't have bar lines like we know them now. And so they weren't thinking about making something irregular. It just, there's a lot of things they just weren't regular, and that was their feature. And so that kind of built in, and also with earlier medieval music, a big part of it, I was just talking about this with my students this week, where like Taruskin, who has written, you know, one man history of all of music theory, beautiful writer, but says that in the kind of 14th century, it's the first time where a philosophical concept led to stylistic innovation in that order, because it was people saying, we can break anything on any rhythmic level into groups of 2 or 3. And then composers were like, great, we're going to wildly do that. And so it basically develops, they're hugely interested in doing what to us reads as polyrhythm, where there's constant switches between, are you feeling something in 2 and 3? And you'll see different lines. The top line will be feeling something in 2, well, the bottom line will be feeling something in 3. The contra line will be kind of either, and you're all doing that at the same time, but it works out. But that kind of like rhythmic complexity is built into that music of those centuries. And by the 16th century, things are more regular. There are more regular phrase lengths and kind of that intense rhythmic interplay. They're not as interested in exploring that anymore. And so just going back just a couple hundred years led us to this music that kind of had something different. And for the Maud Pursues the Abbot, one choice that we made is that if you listen to it carefully, you'll hear that we put a rhythmic drum pattern that doesn't change, but the rhythmic pulse of the melody actually gets offset. So there's a section in the middle where you feel the strong beat in the drum and the strong beat in the melody are not the same thing. And we wanted to keep that in because it's so unsettling.
And
then when it kind of comes back together, you feel kind of a relief, but also it's still pretty alarming. So we were able to kind of use those tools together in a way that maybe if we were doing the piece in a concert, we would choose to have the drum always follow the melody. Because
we'd add a beat somewhere. You'd be like, oh, this has to be a triple instead of a duple thing to kind of balance that out. Because in most concerts, this was another thing that we found out, is that we're interested always in creating variety and really like expressing the text we're singing. But I feel like, Tracy, in most of our concerts, we're not trying to depict as much danger. No. We generally want our audience members to feel interested, excited, and safe. You know?
Not necessarily like deeply unsettled on a spiritual level. That's
right. You're not solving murders at your concerts. Not
yet.
Not yet.
Tracy, when we do a murder mystery medieval concert,
you should.
Then.
Yep.
But yeah, so we want to kind of think of different tools, and then we also realized that that it's kind of similarly, by the time we get to the 16th century, people are not using tonality in the same way that we are now, but it's kind of closer to how we are. And that people kind of, that basically something that is fast and in a minor key doesn't read as ominous, in a way that when we hear things in Dorian or especially Phrygian mode, which was a totally normal mode of the medieval period, people, I do not think we're using it to seem ominous then, but to us, that like lowered second reads as very different and also kind of creepy.
Mysterious, kind of otherworldly. Yeah. Outside the bounds of normal everyday life. Yeah.
So also that's using those earlier, either composing our own modal melodies or using earlier modal melodies also gave us a way in to kind of have that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I was and am such a Baroque nut. Like I have portraits of Jean-Philippe Rameau and Bach in my house, my apartment. So, I mean, I'm just huge. And, you know, as far as like polyphony and Baroque music, and I always want to hear it on, I mean, maybe not always, but I prefer to hear it on instruments of the era. I just think it just feels right to me to hear it that way. And I'm like that with keyboard music, and people who listen to this podcast know how much I love harpsichord. I love harpsichord. Like it's all I want to hear. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, what do you think really drew you to, you know, this different type of music? Because even Baroque music, even though it's tonal, it's very different than today's music, right? But you're even going, you know, centuries before that in some cases. So, you know, what lit that spark for you each?
I have both kind of like a boots on the ground answer and also a philosophical answer.
Okay.
So, so the, you know, the kind of boots on the ground answer is there's so much good music throughout time, space, history. Like humans are creating amazing sounds, right?
Yes.
And what I love, and I could talk about what I love about all of them. What I love about the medieval world and the early music world kind of in general, like Sean said, we've kind of found ourselves mostly in this medieval world, is there's a real visceral kind of folk element to a lot of it, and also a real elegant kind of artistically stylized element to a lot of it that feels very familiar to me as a 21st century person. And it's fun to kind of really explore the language of both those worlds, which tends, because, you know, we have a lot of material, but a lot of it is still left open to the performer. The performer, even more so in the Baroque, is really considered the realizer of this music. And so the fact that so much is left open to the performer, the fact that there's still a whole bunch we don't know, kind of is, as one of our colleagues has put it, is an invitation to creation, to creativity. And that is just, it's a really fun place to be. So, you know, to bring a text alive, to find yourself in it, to find another viewpoint in it, and to think, how do I bring this viewpoint? How do I honor the past, or how do I put myself in the past? You know, how am I choosing those things? So all those things are really fun. The sounds are really fun. You know, one of the things I love about being an early musician is it's like, there are so many interesting sounds to play with. And it hasn't gotten, there's no right answer that has been grafted onto it yet. People keep trying to do it. Like, you know, we really like to know what's right or wrong, but the Middle Ages has so far defied that categorization globally. And I hope it stays that way. Yeah. So that's kind of like but, you know, kind of philosophically, I started trying to become a musician in my late 20s. And that was, you know, I felt really committed to it, but it's not when most people start that career.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found really wonderful was that the early music community was very inviting. And there's, I think, in there just that thing of essentially access. Like it was an avenue that was, people went out of their way to include me in it. And the same thing with the medieval world. You know, I got into the early music world, and then in the medieval world, people went out of their way to make space for me within it. There was a space for me to be creative. And that is a big part of why I became a medieval musician as opposed to some other kind of musician. And I really think that making music is such a wonderful thing to do as a human, but there are so many avenues that we block it off from people. We tell them, you need to be doing it professionally for it to be legitimate. You know, you needed to start when you were a child. Just, there are so many ways that we don't open open the gates for people to be a part of that, for all sorts of reasons, which we don't have time to get into. And I know that personally, having that door opened for me in a world where there were a lot of doors that were already closed is why I get to do this awesome thing. And so music rocks. We should help people do it.
Yeah, we should. Sean, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I growing up, I was really lucky to have parents that were really supportive, in part because I had this example in my family of that being a professional musician is a job you can have.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept doing these things. I went to school with just such talented people who do now have jobs in major orchestras. They're incredible. And I'm so lucky to know them. But I feel like I was kind of peer pressured into thinking that that's what I should be trying to do. Which is a hilarious thing to be peer pressured into. Like, of course you want to win an orchestra job. Like, that's what your friends are doing. Like, that's the normal thing to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't have an example of anyone who had the kind of life that I now have. And I kept trying to be on that path, and I was practicing my orchestral excerpts, and it's just such a hard world. I compare it to trying to win a job in a professional orchestra is like trying to get into the NBA.
Yeah.
Like you can be amazing and you cannot get in because of skill and luck and timing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And basically, as I was kind of in that world in the middle of my master's, I started playing the Baroque oboe kind of on a whim for fun. And it was just so nice to do a thing that was totally for fun. It didn't matter at that point. I'm like, oh, what a beautiful feeling. But it felt like it was totally for myself, and that all of my practicing could just be to explore. And also there wasn't a right answer, which I kind of have a conflicted relationship with, because I'm a really good student, and one reason why is because I'm really good at following instructions. And I honestly think that part of what I enjoyed about being a musician as a young person is that I could follow instructions really well, and then the results were really fun. But so was the pleasure of just being like, yeah, I can do exactly what my teacher told me to do. Like, isn't that exciting? When I was 10, like, that's pretty great. It took me a really long time. I was in my early 30s in New York before I realized that actually something that I think a lot of my colleagues had always known, and we didn't necessarily talk about it, but actually as a professional musician, your job is to figure out what instructions you want to give to yourself and then to execute them. You're the one who decides. Like, you can't, that's actually the job. And it's kind of intimidating, but also pretty liberating to be like, instead of just being like, my job is to play this piece as my teacher told me to, and if I can't do it, then I'm really frustrated. It's like, my job is to figure out how I want to play this piece, and then to decide if I've done it. And excitingly, as a medieval musician, because we're modifying music all the time, we have so many records of the same song existing in like really different versions, where we're like, oh, the melodic contour is the same, but the individual notes totally different, totally fine. So honestly, as a medieval musician, if you decide that you can't do something, then it's your job to find out a better version that you can actually play. And that's totally okay.
Yeah.
But so it was a first kind of a window open to a world where there were more options, and then it became just a place to explore this newfound creativity and this new license to creation that I gave myself actually pretty recently. I'm like, even since I knew Tracy and I have known each other and been, best friends since like 2010. And I would say that in the beginning of knowing each other, I was still trying really hard to follow instructions that somebody else gave me. And that's what I thought being a good musician was.
Sure.
And now, it's pretty great. So for us, it's, if you're going to wildly generalize, the earlier you go back, the less instructions you get from the composer and the more you have to bring to the table. Yeah. And so the point that I am at now is like, that's why I love doing really early music. And for us as a band, it was also interesting because we do a lot of 16th century music, but the 16th century is actually pretty late for us. Even the 15th century is pretty late for us. We're doing a D5 program next month, and we're like, whoa, what are these 5-voice pieces?
So many written out voices.
Because we are really comfortable in like the 12th and 13th centuries, where most of the music is maybe only one line, maybe not rhythmicized, and we turn it into like a fully worked out piece that involves 6 people.
Nice.
I feel like
that's our wheelhouse.
That's
one of our wheelhouses. Yeah.
Yeah, we love it there. So that's a big reason. And part of it is that, it's weird being called a early music specialist, because actually the deep secret is that we get to do so many different things. Yeah. Because we're playing so many different instruments, so many different centuries. If you think about even that we specialize in the music from the 12th through the 18th centuries, like that's a lot of different things we get to do.
It's a long time. Yeah. It's a long time.
If you're a modern orchestral player, you're mostly playing music from the 19th, the end of the 18th through now, but a lot of your music is in the 19th and early 20th century, and we don't call them specialists.
Right. I know. The thing, tonality just comparatively has just, as we know it is such a short period of time. And I try to explain that to people sometimes. It's like, listen, we've only had, leading tones for a few hundred years, and there were centuries and centuries of music before that time. So, and it didn't stick around long either. In the 20th century, they're like, screw a leading tone. It's like,
right. They're like, this common practice stuff, it's been working out fine for 150 years, but I got other ideas.
Yeah, but it's so crazy how it was just like, boop, tonality as we know it. That's it. And we're done. So crazy. And it's just ruled our lives in weird ways. But yeah. I hate to do, I have to let you go now. And I'm so bummed. But Bill's got to get paid.
We understand.
Just such a wonderful, wonderful soundtrack and experience. And, obviously it goes without saying that you've introduced this kind of music to a lot of people who would never have heard it otherwise. And I just love you for that. So
thanks.
I can't wait to hear your albums that you've got coming up. And I hope that there's a Pentiment 2 or something down the road that we can hear you in games again, because just what an absolute pleasure and treasure to have this out in the world now. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. It's been so much fun to talk to you. And I hope we've made it clear that it's just the whole experience has been such a delight for us. Like it's been one of the most special things we've ever been involved with.
Yeah.
And we feel so privileged to get to have done it.
Yeah. There's more. That's awesome. If not, this was great.